Greetings. Welcome to the Marginally Geeky Show. I'm your host for the evening, Eugene Stevens. Tonight, I'm joined by the usual cast. I've got Jennifer sitting here next to me. We've got Sean and Chris and Ray up there in Canada. And joining us tonight is our very special guest, the author of the Bobiverse series, the Quantum Earth series, and the Singularity Trap, Mr. Dennis E. Taylor. Thank you so much for joining us. So excited to have you on the show. We talked about before the beginning of the episode. Sean is the one that actually recommended this series for us to read. He's like, "Hey, I've read this really awesome sci-fi book. I think it would be good for the show." And we read the first one. We reviewed it almost 2 years ago, and I don't know. We just didn't get around to read it. We've all read the books. Like, we immediately had to get through the books because they do flow together so very well. And we're just really big fans, and we couldn't wait to have you on, sir.
Thank you for those kind words.
So, I'll go ahead and start off real quick. So how did you get into writing?
I could say accidentally, or I could say I lost a bet.
A heck of a bet.
It's a... Well, I've told this story before, but I guess it bears repeating because it's an interesting case of how your life can change based on very, very small butterfly effect things. I bought an iPad. I got Kindle. I started downloading a lot of free books from Amazon. One in particular was very, very bad, and I said words that included the concept of I could do better. And my wife said to me, "Well, why don't you? Go ahead, write something." So I thought about it for a while, and I fired up Word and I started writing, and that was Outland, the first iteration of Outland. I tried to I did query it around, and nobody bit, so I self-published. But it made coffee money every month, even Starbucks coffee money, and so I got the bug, I guess. And then I started writing Outland Legion as soon as Outland was published, and that one did get picked up. Nice. And it just snowballed from there.
Awesome. That's really cool.
Really cool, yeah.
Well,
I got a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Everyone just jump in. Like, I don't want to have to.
Yeah, nobody else is jumping in. I might as well ask this one. I have to know, because you've mentioned it in a couple of books now. How far north did you have to go to find your pterodactyl mosquitoes that you're terrified of?
You mean to get away from them? No, I don't hate mosquitoes as much as Bob does. I don't think anybody hates mosquitoes as much as Bob does, but they're not my favorite animal, that's for sure. We don't have mosquitoes in Vancouver anything like, for instance, Winnipeg does.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, Winnipeg. My understanding is if they get a group together, they can carry you off.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, no joke.
Couple bats, It's...
Yeah. No, in Winnipeg, the mosquitoes chase the bats.
It's true. Yeah, I used to live in Northern Ontario as a kid, up north, past Thunder Bay, and it was
Oh yeah, but you have the black flies there.
The black flies, deer flies, horse flies, and then you got the pine beetles that drop out of the tree.
Yes.
That if they bite you, will take chunks out of you.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to move there.
I was a kid. I didn't have any choice. That's why we.
Yeah. Generally, stingy, bitey insects and me don't get along.
Same.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I've got one for you, Dennis.
Okay.
Your writing style. When you were writing, did your writing style change with the thought that this was going to go right to an audiobook, or is your writing style meant for written word?
Yeah, I originally wrote for text because that's what I'm used to. Once I started listening to my work in audio and other people's work, I started to realize that there are some changes that have to be made to make it sound better. John Scalzi has commented that he's had to change his writing style for audio. He's one of the believers in said as an invisible word, and in print it is an invisible word. You hardly even notice it, but in audio it sticks out like a sore thumb. So you use a lot less dialogue tags and a lot more beats in audio.
I think most of us listen to your books. I read the first one and then listened to the last two. So did you have like a kind of a vision of how you wanted the different characters to sound, or did you coach the narrator at all, or did you kind of just say, here, kind of do your own thing?
Well, Ray asked me before he started recording if I had any pre-existing visions of any of the characters, or anything that he'd like them to sound like, or that I'd like them to sound like. And I did for a couple. For the most part, I told him, just go with it, do whatever works for you. But Butterworth, I imagined sounding like Fowler from Chicken Run. And of course, Guppy had to sound like
yes.
That was great.
Homer, I imagined sounding like Bill Murray from Ghostbusters for some reason.
Okay.
And Ray pulled it off. Bridget had to have an Irish accent, obviously being Irish. Other than that, I think he pulled more of a Belfast accent than a Wexford accent, but whatever. But other than that, he just went with it. He just did whatever sounded best to him.
Yeah, I think we were all really big fans of his narration and how distinctly he made the characters sound, because that's a hard book to do that with.
Yeah. Well, especially when most of the characters by default are the same character.
Exactly. Yeah.
But we commented on the last, when we actually reviewed the second and third Bobiverse book together. And one of the comments that I made in particular, and everyone agreed, was even though, it is the same voice actor, you can just tell as soon as he starts with an inflection, you're like, oh, that's Bob, that's Will, that's Bill. And but you can also pick it up from your writing. Like, we know how they speak, we know how they're going to react to things. And so, yeah.
Oh.
I had a question. How much planning and plotting do you do for each book? I met an author once and he said he did 64 pages of just bullet point before he even started anything. Do you flush it out that much, or do you more just sort of type and see what happens?
Not that much. That sounds like a lot of planning. But I do write out a sentence per theoretical chapter.
Okay.
My final result very rarely resembles the initial plan. Excuse me. But at least I have an initial plan. I have known writers who are totally discovery writers, and they just sit at the keyboard and they start typing and they wait to see what happens. And they're as surprised as everybody else, by what the characters do. But I have a good idea of where I'm going. I have a good idea of what the ending is. I have a fairly good idea of how I'm going to get there, but everything else is subject to change without notice.
Awesome. All right.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you write all three books together, or did you have a plan for how they were all going to go, or did you do one, kind of left it off for yourself, did the second one, then did the third one, or was it all kind of at once?
The thing about the We Are Legion series is that between the time that I queried it, or by the time that I finished it and started querying it, and the time that it actually got picked up by Audible, I had time to write the first two and about half of the third. So by the time Legion was actually published, the entire series was essentially roughed out.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
The Legion series isn't a typical trilogy in that most trilogies, I think, at least try to have a logical break between each book, as opposed to cliffhangers. I was a little weak in that area. I think a lot of people have complained that the books just stopped rather than wrapping things up. It's not as bad as Lord of the Rings, but bad enough. But it was always going to be 3 books. There was always way too much material there for 1 or 2 books.
So we were talking about your characters during the review and everything, and a lot of them are very relatable for us. I'm just curious, are they based on anybody you know, or not just Bob, but Bridget, or even the people from your other books?
Well, as far as Bridget is concerned, my brother-in-law, Patrick, is one of my beta readers. And he commented after reading book 2 that my screen just turned off. Hold on. Just completely changed the lighting in here. I'm getting 4-lit from my computer monitor. Anyway, Patrick complained that he felt a little weird reading about Howard's relationship with Bridget, because he said Bridget was way too much like his sister, my wife.
That makes sense.
Yeah. The Bobs in general are just a lot like a lot of people that I know or have known. Being in the IT industry, of course, you tend to meet intellectual, geeks, nerds.
Yes.
People who are more into gaming or computers or programming than into football or basketball or anything like that. So I think Bob reflects that.
Which is why I
Probably
think
why
all
we
of
like
us
it so
here on
much.
this show
Yeah.
associate with at least one version of Bob or another. I can see myself as I can see myself as several different Bobs. You can't see them off screen. I have 3 3D printers. I run an Etsy store on the side, and so keeping track of 3D printers and what they're doing and all that other stuff. So as soon as that was a major thing to all the the books, I was just like, oh, I so feel Bob's pain. So
Yeah. Well, there you go. And those are the types of people who seem to become fans of the Bobiverse. Techies, nerds, engineers, astronomers, stuff like that. And well, they should be.
Yeah, because you really go into detail in resource procurement and management and the logistics of a lot of things. And a lot of books and movies just kind of glaze over that part and just take it for granted that, oh yeah, there's unlimited resources and unlimited bullets in this gun and yada yada, and you kind of actually make the reader think about, oh wow, yeah, that might take an entire asteroid's worth of metal or whatever they're doing to do that. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I assumed the mediocrity principle when writing, which would say to me that I'm average, and that my feelings on things like that should be average. So if it bugs the hell out of me that they gloss over that stuff, it must bug the hell out of other people too. Yeah. So I put it in. It's called serial problem solving. The Martian is famous for it.
Mm-hmm.
And The Martian did very well. So obviously a lot of people like that particular emphasis.
The term I coined for it, excuse the vulgarity, is resource management porn. And I spend a lot of my day with resource management. So the entire series, like Jen said, of having to figure out, we only have so much materials, and then we have to figure out how we're going to balance it to print, and how we're going to get people moved, how we're going to save stuff, how we're going to fight this war. But that's even in Outland. I love the fact that this group comes together and is like, okay, what do we have? How do we get more resources? How are we going to keep people alive? At first it's just, how do we keep people alive now? And then for a couple of weeks, and now it's like, oh man, this may be forever. How are we going to do this? And seeing their thought process is, we discussed it. It's very much how we would hope that we would go through it. I mean, of course, hopefully we never have to go through anything like that, but it's it's one of those things. It's like, of course I wouldn't have thought about this, or I'm glad I would have thought the same thing. And
I think I think it's neat to kind of see that process and know that, oh, okay, if I was in that situation or a similar situation, now I kind of know how it might be fixed, or how I might be able to start. Because sometimes you're just like, where would I start in that? Yeah. If I was thrown into a computer in 150 years, how would I start processing all that?
Poorly.
I've learned that I've learned that I have to learn how to code and
quickly
get into VR.
Yeah. Did you have to I guess there was some, kind of research on your part as far as, how a lot of that stuff worked, but were you already kind of into the science of a lot of the things that you explained? And obviously some of it was probably, exaggerated a little, but did you find that you had to do a lot of research, or did you kind of just generally know a lot of it from your own, background?
Which book?
Well, Bob, I guess the Bobiverse.
Let's start with Bobiverse.
Yeah. I was at one time an amateur astronomer, so I'm very much up on astronomical issues, and I've never stopped reading about it. So Sky and Telescope, Scientific American, Phys.org, phys.org, or is it phys.org.com? I should think about that now. Those places I frequent all the time. So the astronomical stuff came fairly quickly. Okay. The Outland stuff, a little more research involved, because I'm not really much of an engineer.
Yeah, we were wondering how much technical research went in there. It seemed like we figured, since you were a programmer, that a lot of the technical stuff was probably at least somewhat familiar to you. You at least wrote it, so it sounded like it was very much in your wheelhouse. We were just trying to figure out, if like you said, the astronomical stuff was that something you had to research or not? But it sounds like that's also something that you're very passionate about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Yeah. Also, I've had it commented that there's just the right amount of exposition in the Legion books. Not too much explanation and not too glossed over. That's not the way it started out. That's why we have editors. Because there was a lot more explanation and exposition in it when I wrote it. And the editor would say things like, "Oh, geez, can we cut that down to one paragraph?" Eventually, we ended up with a good balance.
I don't know. There's part of me that's kind of wanting to see what the. Yeah, I was gonna say, I want to kind of see if there's you normally would say director's cut. I want to see if there's an author's cut of this, because I'm sure some of it I'd be like, ooh, tell me more.
Nerd.
I'd read it.
Ray'd read it too. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, so speaking of that, then the process that you kind of looked into, more specifically about replication, would you replicate yourself?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I have to be careful here. In the Legion books, it's fatal. So
that's
not if it was fatal, but if I was able to do it, in my will, after I died, to be replicated, absolutely. It's a no loss situation as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. What would your VR be?
Good question.
We asked that in the first episode.
Good question.
Yeah. Actually, I'd probably do like a lot of the Bobs do and just bounce around, try different things. I'd start with the library because I love the idea of a library, but at one point I'd probably end up with a space platform, just open, non-air space platform.
Oh,
Yeah, that'd be cool.
It is interesting.
I liked the one where you had, I can't remember who did it, but they had Earth in the background and all the different planets and stuff like that. And he's just chilling out in the moon or I like that one.
Yeah, I think that was actually Riker, Will, from 82 or Danny, because that was,
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm going off on a tangent. I could be wrong.
That actually leads me into another question. How did you keep all of the Bobs straight?
Yes, yeah.
That was on my list.
Oh, software.
I just picture a giant
Software, yeah,
board.
very smart. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
No.
I had a timeline program and I had Excel, and I had to pretty rigorously keep track of times and dates and durations and stuff like that, just to make sure that things meshed chronologically.
That's what I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
because I was more interested in how you kept the timelines
Yeah.
straight,
Oh, yeah.
because there was, at points, there was like 10, 20, 30 years in between chapters. And when our discussion before, I felt time was an actual character in your books. It almost had to be. But,
Yeah.
that makes sense now. That was one of my big questions. How did you keep that straight?
I'm just picturing the world's largest whiteboard. It's like 50 different columns because there were so many Bobs.
Yeah, it's an entire room of whiteboard.
Yeah.
Well, the spreadsheet was fairly convoluted too. I mean, I had formulas in there to make sure that calculated start and end dates and stuff properly.
Wow, nicely done.
Gene is such a fan of spreadsheets, so he's
I am. I'm
excited
very
to
excited.
say
I
that.
specifically said he uses spreadsheets too, to the point they make fun of me. So, I've never been a database guy. I'm always a spreadsheet guy. I'm sorry. There's just a bunch of questions, and I'm not. I don't want to monopolize the question. So, Sean, what's your next question?
I'm wondering a bit more about the X Foundation. You're still in it, correct? The
X Prize?
X Prize Foundation.
Yeah, I am part of it, and I'm on the board. It's not a very active posting, I guess you'd say.
It's a pretty heady group.
It is. It definitely is. Unfortunately, the X Prize people have started charging an entry fee or registration fee for their annual conference. I think starting last year, and it's fairly steep, so not going.
No, it's American too, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Dang Yanks.
Yeah, American.
My time would be better spent going to cons and stuff. So, when I have the free time, that's what I try to book.
But even getting in there, like your favorite author, Larry Niven, is in there too. Like I was taking a look, and there's a lot of big names in that one. Margaret Atwood. Ugh, had to read her in high school.
Go on.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to jump back in. Going back to Ray Porter, did you have a say on picking him for the narrator, or no?
I don't know for sure whether if I'd kicked up a fuss, I could have gotten somebody else. The simple fact of the matter is I had no clue. So I just let them pick it for me.
Mm-hmm.
I had some inkling of asking for Will Wheaton because I just listened to him do a Scalzi book, Locked In, and it was really good. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if Will Wheaton did my book? But before I could bring it up, Steve announced, oh, well, Ray Porter will be doing it for you. Okay. Who's Ray Porter?
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, I'd only listened to the one audiobook, and even that only because I was signed up with Audible. So I wanted to see what all the fuss was about.
Right. I think Ray did a great job.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know like we talked about, it was his ability to go in from one character to the next that I really enjoyed. So yeah.
Well, I believe that's specifically why Steve assigned Ray to me, because of the number of different voices in the books, and Ray's particularly good with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I enjoy your sprinkling of swear words. I'm a big fan of cussing, so it's
enough,
the right
yeah.
amount. It's the right amount, and I enjoy it. So thank you.
Well, Bob likes to use swear words as emphasis, and if you use them too much, they just become, conjunctions or commas or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. Nothing like a well-placed MFer. I love it.
I also love how you have certain similarities for all of the Bobs. So even though they have their own personalities and they're all different versions, there are certain things that always bring them back. Every time we get someone else added to BobNet and Bill pops in, they all immediately go wholly in the same inflection, and I'm just like, you can still tell it's the same base character. It's just a different version of them. Which, speaking of which, how did you come up with some of the names? Like, why did you pick Bob, Bill, Will, Homer?
Different reasons for different characters at different times. Bob was because Bob is a very generic name. We are Legion. We are, that sounds like you should be saying it in a deep voice with reverb in the background. Right. And lightning crashing from the sky. Yeah, and then you need a complete 360 on that. We are Bob.
Yes.
Bob.
So,
Bob. Yeah.
So nice and inoffensive and non-memorable and stuff like that, and it just fit. After that, because of why the Bobs were picking their names, essentially to just be unique, I just started coming up with character names that I've remembered for one reason or another over time. Like Bill was Bill the cat. Mario is Mario.
I liked Mulder and Skinner because
yeah.
X-Files.
I liked Hungry.
Yeah, well, I had to go over that one a few times to make sure that it wasn't going to get Disney after me.
Oh, that's fair.
There you go. Yep.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
That's fair.
Well, I mean, it's something you might have to consider for the future. And I'm sure we know how legal things go. If you can just wink, is there any thought, movement, idea of this becoming a movie, TV series, yada yada yada?
Well,
it's been optioned.
I did sign a movie option, or I don't know if you can call it a movie option. Basically, an option on We Are Legion about 20 months ago. 21 months ago, somewhere around there. It was for 18 months with an option to renew for a further 18 months. And at the end of 18 months, they renewed. Now that's significant because they have to pay me money each time.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're paying money for a renewal, there must be something there. Something going on, something being negotiated or something in discussion. But I have no details because once these companies sign an option with you, they don't talk to you again until they have something.
Yeah.
So, is that a frustrating thing that sort of you've signed it over and yeah? Okay.
Yeah, it's frustrating because it would be nice to know if something was actually, in the works. But
they wouldn't need a very large cast. One main character and several, supporting characters.
Yeah, so on Reddit, someone posted a thing. If they were to do, let's say, a TV series, who would you want to cast as each of the individual Bobs? And when I brought that up, we all came to this. We're like, no,
same person.
We want to see the same person play all of them. And of course, we thought, I mean, granted, we're not
could do that.
actors, but I'm like, that seems like a dream role for someone to be able to say, hey, I did a series and I played 25 different people with each individual inflection. But anyway,
Orphan Black.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yes.
I mean,
Exactly.
the actress obviously made a name for herself running all those different characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be.
So
Exhausting.
speaking of all that, then who would you want to see play Bob?
I have thought about that, and I've been asked that on a number of occasions, and I don't have a strong feeling about it, but when I have tried to visualize it, for some reason I see Ryan Reynolds.
I was thinking that actually.
Oh my god.
And I,
You just
Canadian-
blew my mind.
Canadian.
And
I was
I think
thinking that
it's
actually.
it's as much about his ad-libbing as anything else. I think he would fit with Bob perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
That would be great.
That would be,
Yeah.
that may be the best one I've heard suggested so far. Yeah, that's great.
See, I originally had thought of the gentleman that played on Split. Forgive me,
James McAvoy.
James McAvoy. I thought he would bring an
Yeah.
interesting, just because
Patricia?
he's already, he's already played so many different characters and proven that he can do that. So that's who I thought would be interesting. But Ryan Reynolds, that
Yeah.
blows me away, man. That'd be cool. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I really appreciated the fact that Bob was he just a character of such moral standing. Like he was basically given immortality and set free, and he still chose to kind of come back and save humanity and replicate himself several times over to, basically spend the next century or so saving the humans that, questionably deserved it the way they were acting sometimes. And I just thought that was really neat because obviously some of the other replicants didn't have that same, moral background to do the right thing, I guess. And
Yeah, but that's just human variation, especially when it's a I don't know if you call it a death of a thousand cuts or a game of inches or whatever, but there's no one point where Bob has to make a huge decision. He kind of finds himself just one step at a time, pulled into it. Well, I'll just do this. I'll just check to see if humanity's still alive. Well, I'll just see if I can stop this asteroid thing. Well, I'll just talk to these people. Well, I'll just build a spaceship. And 1 inch at a time, one step at a time, he finds himself embroiled. And it actually turns out to be a political hot potato in the Bobiverse as well, because they don't all agree with that.
Yeah.
This is just
I was just
go on,
reading-
Sean.
Oh, sorry. So I just saw that your editor suggested Heaven's River get merged into one book rather than two. Are you happy with that decision? Or
Well, that's a good news, bad news thing. I'm happy with it from the point of view that Steve argued successfully that it was worth doing. He argued that the fan base would be much happier with one book with two parts rather than two books, especially considering the size of the cliffhanger at the end of book one. Yeah, it's like the old Adam West Batman thing, Will Batman get out with his head intact? Next week, same bat time, same bat channel. I mean, I deliberately wrote a massive cliffhanger at the end of book one, and Steve didn't think it would fly well. So, he said, look, put them together. You're putting out a double-length book. The readers will love a longer book, getting more money or, more book for their credit. The cliffhanger won't be a problem because it's just a chapter break. And, the only problem, the only potential problem was whether the size of the resulting book would make it difficult to do print on demand through Amazon, because they have limitations on the size of the spine.
Yeah.
But we checked up on it, and it's okay.
Huh.
And the downside of that decision is that I have now delivered one book on my 3-book contract instead of 2 books on my 3-book contract.
I was going to say, did you wrap up everything you were wanting to do with that series, or is this giving you the opportunity to explore more things that you hadn't quite wrapped up?
Oh, I'll be doing more books on the Bobiverse universe anyway.
Okay.
Whether it's in this contract or another contract. The contracts are only about money. The number of books I'm going to write is the same regardless.
Gotcha.
So speaking of more, any chance we're getting more from Outland? Because I love where you've taken that series, and I can't wait to see where you go with it.
Well, I'm writing the second book, Earthside, right now.
Mm-hmm.
If you like project management porn, you get a lot more of it in Earthside. In Earthside, they come to accept that they are in a long-term situation, and that they have to plan for the long term now. It's not just a question of popping across, collecting food, collecting lawnmowers or whatever they need, and keeping them oiled. They now have to deal with the possibility that they're going to start losing knowledge as people get old and die. Knowledge shrink. Medicines expire.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff
And
like
I love that you touched on that too, and that was something else that we talked about, the whole resource management part of it. You touched on that, and especially with you have the I call her the doctor. She's the medical authority, and she was saying that we're gonna have a bunch of babies showing up here, and we need to prepare that we're not going to be surviving. Like they're not all going to be surviving, and it's going to be a hard go. And I like that you were able to touch on that stuff. So, yeah.
Well, it's funny, but I think people in general don't realize the extent to which we live in an artificial environment.
Mm-hmm.
And until you get plopped into an alternate universe and you don't have all these things around you, and what do you mean I can't have popcorn? Well, there's popcorn here.
You can't have bread. There's no wheat.
Yes.
Yeah, things like corn, for instance. You can't just grow corn. You can't propagate corn. It doesn't create its own seeds. It can't self-germinate. So humans have to replant corn every year. Basically, we're like midwives to corn. So and most people don't realize that. And corn is a really good staple crop. It's much more nutritious than most of the other crops that we could grow. It's just also, unfortunately, the hardest to grow without technological assistance.
Good point.
Yeah.
I've been doing research.
So when the apocalypse comes, we're not getting popcorn anymore.
Apparently not.
Bad news.
Oh, there's
No more popcorn. And Orville Redenbacher expires really quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a big difference in writing the Bobiverse books, whereas you've got one character that becomes many as compared to, let's take Outland, where you have 6 different personalities, and that you kept pulling in additional people that were specialists in different things? Or was it a lot different, or was it kind of the same? It's instead of being many people, it's just one person, just different versions.
Well, the biggest difference is that Outland is written in third person, and that really requires a different writing style.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways. In some ways, it's easier to bring in extra characters because you don't have to worry about them being like the first character or anything like that. In some ways, it's more difficult because in the Bobiverse, I can add Bobs as necessary, and it's perfectly reasonable. In Outland, if you start to add too many different people, readers start to lose track.
Mm-hmm.
And readers lose track, readers lose interest. So I had to be a lot more careful about keeping the number of POVs down to a small number.
I think there was a good amount in Outland. I don't think I enjoyed seeing them play off each other. You could tell that they knew of each other, and it was it was a good number. I wouldn't want to see too many more point of views, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, the first version of Outland had more points of view. In the first version, and that was just my lack of experience, but I just added a POV whenever I needed one.
Yeah.
And it got a little overboard. So again, editor, ha!
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll go rewrite it.
Just a quick question. In the beginning of the second, in We Are Many, when he's describing the pigoid hunt, there's a Delton named Fred. I think he's the one that puts his pike down and it breaks and he gets hurt, and they kind of make a joke and carry him back. Is it the same Fred that is in the third book that's causing so much problems in Carleon? I was pretty sure it wasn't the case, but I just had to ask.
Yeah, and actually, until you said that, I didn't realize that I'd reused the name.
You're welcome.
No, but all the people from Carleon are young Daltons.
Yeah, and I remember you said that. So I figured it was a separate one, but I just wanted to kind of double check because, like Ray brought up, he's like, they're like humans. They're going to recycle names. There's going to be more than one, just Bob or Fred.
Yeah.
But I just had to check. Does anyone have any other questions they want to throw out there?
I've got.
Is there any chance of getting a sequel to Singularity Trap?
Good question.
Oh yeah, yeah. I already have a general plot line hammered out.
That's all the hope I need.
You mentioned the self-publishing. I was just curious how you found that whole process. Is it worth somebody going through it if they're having issues with trying to get their own stuff published?
That's an interesting question, and there's a lot of ways of looking at it. Self-publishing certainly gets you a lot of experience. There's nothing like diving in. You can study swimming all you want, but until you actually dive in, you don't really understand the mechanics. And self-publishing certainly gets you into that. However, if you self-publish a book, it doesn't reduce your chances of getting a subsequent book represented, by the way. It's not like it's a death knell to your career. A lot of people worry about that, and it makes absolutely no difference. But once you've self-published a book, chances are you've used it up. Right? It's not going to get picked. I say that being the exception to that, but that's just a unique circumstance. Generally speaking, any self-published books that you put out, you've used up that idea. It's gone. It's in the public. It's in the public eye. Your publisher isn't going to pick it up. Your agent isn't going to pick it up. You just forget about it.
That's fair. Yeah. My last question is: you mentioned conventions. Any chance of ever going to Fan Expo in Toronto?
I don't see any. Actually, Toronto would be easier than going across the border, especially right now. Not the Iranian or anything like that, but yeah, I overdid it a little bit in 2018. I think it's 2018, and then in 2019 I kind of pulled back and hardly went anywhere. Yeah. 2020 I'm going to start very carefully picking up on some cons and expos and stuff like that, and Canadian one would certainly be in the mix.
I only say that because
we're going.
We're planning on
going to
to
Toronto once. So, you know, we'll stop by and say hi if you.
How do you feel about Texas in May? It's really great down here in the middle of summer kickoff.
Is it getting hot in May?
A little bit. It depends on what Texas feels
We're
like.
Canadians. Our hot is a little different.
Yeah, it's starting to get a little hot.
Well, okay. Now we can talk about that afterwards. So
start it out there.
Yeah.
So do we want to bring up? There seem to be some parallels to real life in some of the.
Okay.
things
Yeah.
that
So we'll
we
just go ahead and
saw
ask the question. So
in the Bobiverse.
In the Bobiverse books, it's a lot of it's kicked off because of a president named Handel that just kind of screws everything up. Based on anyone, or
that was written completely before Trump was even a thought.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
That's what we were thinking time-wise. But as we're reading it, it's about the same, and it's just like, how much of a crystal ball did he have writing this?
Were you a writer for The Simpsons? Is what I'm asking.
Yeah, you want to ask about crystal ball gazing? You talk to the Simpsons writers.
Yeah.
No joke. Wow, it's almost like if I was one of the writers now, I'd almost be scared to put any thought out into the universe. I'd be like, "What do I really want to make this come true?" So,
I will say I do appreciate the focus, whether it was intentional or not, on the environmental issues. Chris and I are really big environmentalists, and we even have a podcast about it. And we just kind of see the things happening in the world and are kind of wringing our hands in some instances because the collective actions of humanity just don't make sense in the face of what's happening. And you kind of see some of that play out in both, Outland and the Bobiverse books. Not that they could have prevented a volcano from erupting, but when they go over, you kind of see the impact they're having on that environment. And yeah, it's just.
Well, Singularity Trap goes a lot into the global warming and the effects of it and stuff like that. It's just a part of the lives of the characters, the changes in geography and everything because of it.
Haven't gotten to that one yet, so I'm gonna
well, there's a place where the Doctor is living that's actually in West Vancouver here, and the description is accurate in terms of what you'd get if the sea level had gone up 20 or 30 feet.
Oh, wow.
I was going to say, I've read it, and I didn't have anyone ask. I guess I was kind of waiting for everyone else. I'm sure it will end up on our to-do list probably this coming year here in the next couple of months. So, yeah, I was going to ask about that. Your descriptions of most of the books take place either in an alternate universe or so on and so forth. But I was going to ask if, how much firsthand experience you had in writing some of that, because it seemed like you were fairly comfortable with that location and knew it quite well.
Yeah, I throw in personal, well-known locations occasionally when I can get away with it, either because the characters can really be there or because it's not specific. For instance, in We Are Legion, Bob talks about taking the sea bus every day, twice a day. Get to and from work, and that's the Vancouver Sea Bus. And I did that for years, so I know what it feels like.
Well, that'd be why Vancouver was one of the surviving colonies.
Yeah. Us here in Ontario got demolished. It was.
I was going to ask about that. What made you the geopolitical outcome that we get? We have basically Europe coming together. We have the Chinese. Why Brazil? What made you think Brazil's going to step up and just really become a powerhouse?
Have against Brazil?
Well, when I was researching who should be the villain, if you will, I discovered that the Brazilian Empire really was a thing 100 or 200 years ago. Brazil was at one time a powerhouse, and technically they could be one again.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm. Especially with their president now, who like gives no fucks and does what he wants. Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting. If you've ever read World War Z, one of the countries that really steps up is Cuba. And when he describes how and why that would be if the world was covered with zombies, it's like, of course, it can be easily defensible. It would actually still be, if in a nuclear situation, they would still be able to produce food. They could be very easily become a powerhouse. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And so when you said Brazil, I was like, okay, it's a huge country. They have a very, high population. I could see them, stuff starts going down and they just start eating up the rest of the continent and taking off. So
yeah, they have traditions. I'm sure, martial traditions would survive, even if they stopped being an empire. There would still be a certain amount of folklore and attitudes. Interesting side note. I've taken a lot of flack about the Bobiverse books from mostly from right-wingers and religious people. I've taken a certain amount of flack from environmentalists for vehement, but by and large, Brazilians are happy as hell that that they're represented as a powerful antagonist.
Wow, there you go.
that I would not. I mean, I understand the first. I understand the first one. I don't really get the yeah, but okay, Brazilian. That's awesome.
Even if they're trying to destroy humanity, they're just happy to be in the story.
Yeah, they're just.
I've never gotten a harsh word from anybody from Brazil on it.
That's awesome, actually.
They're like, we're a main character.
Yeah, exactly.
We're represented.
We're Dr. Evil.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's funny you get flack from environmentalists about vehement. It's not even such a different.
Yeah, it's just a little bit, but it was in a blog, and it was the kind of reaction of somebody who just I think identified with the environmentalists and maybe took themselves a little too seriously.
There's a few of those.
I've never really thought of that. Have you ever thought about like who you actually are going to offend when you're writing something like that? Because I've never.
Or do you care?
Or do you care? Yeah, I guess it's the other.
I think about it, but let's put it this way: I don't go out of my way to offend anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I don't go out of my way to avoid offending anybody. If the situation, if the plot calls for, a right-wing theocracy, it calls for a right-wing theocracy. What am I supposed to do?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's going to be an American right-wing theocracy, it's going to be Christian-based because there just aren't enough Muslims in America to believably pull off a Muslim theocracy. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So when the Christians start waving their fists at me in print, I just look went.
Also, yeah, it's telling that, it's like, well, if you're offended by it, then obviously there's a reason that like you said, that you picked up on it. It's kind of just easy pickings because that you must lean towards it, or something in there must lean towards it. I don't know, but
on my blog page, there's a comment from somebody, quite a long one, who started off by telling me that it was ridiculous that I made the Christians the bad guys and had the Christians take over the United States and form a theology. And this person then went into a long and involved rant about why it should have been Muslims and it would be believable if it was Muslims and why I should have used Muslims and stuff. I'm thinking to myself, do you hear yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why it would be Christians.
It's actually happening already. People are in the South.
Yeah.
Everyone wants everything to be Christian, so.
Well, if no one has any.
Again, I didn't set out to offend Christians. It's just that's what the book required.
Mm-hmm.
In the first iterations, it wasn't even a theology. It was just an autocracy. But then I needed them to see Bob as not alive, And the only way you're going to do that is from a theological point of view. No soul, not a person. Sorry.
Yeah.
That was such a good part of. I'm really glad you touched on that. So.
Yeah. Just one more question. That's okay. So you're when you write, are you an everyday writer? Do you sit down? Do you have a scheduled time where, like a 9 to 5, for example, that you're like, okay, you start cracking your knuckles, I'm down, and then you take your lunch break and then you go write some more? Do you write at home? Do you have to leave and write somewhere else?
Oh, I wish. I should be. I should be organized about it, but I'm not. I wish I was, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm a binge writer.
Okay.
When I get into the mood, boy, I can just go at it, and I can hammer out 10,000 words a day. But when I'm not in the mood, I'll stare at one sentence for hours.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I won't. I'll stare at it for about 10 minutes and say, screw this, I need a Coke.
I appreciate the honesty.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Very
awesome.
good.
Thank you.
Well, if no one has any other questions, okay.
I have an email here. Waffles or pancakes?
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, that was mine.
Oh. It's yours.
I didn't know if you sent that or not.
I did send it. I was like, okay, I'll put it out there. So we asked the hard questions here. You know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Waffles if there's strawberries available. Pancakes if not.
Good man.
Always maple syrup, though.
Yes.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Canada.
Ooh.
What's that?
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Either's an option too.
Wow.
I enjoy both. I guess series is a good word for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they call Star Wars science fantasy and Star Trek more science fiction, and I agree with that to a large extent. They each have their own place. You can get lost in Star Wars because there's so many aliens and so many planets and you know, so many different factions going on, and most of it's not explained. But then that's the whole point of Star Wars, is it's space opera.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek is much more plotted.
So have you thought about politics?
As little as possible.
There you go.
Oh, Lord.
I thought for sure you were going to say Star Trek just because of the Riker. We've got Riker, we've got Romulus and Vulcan, and thank you, I totally blanked out. There's a lot of
But
Star
he had
Trek
Akbar,
references.
so.
Yeah.
That's very true too. So
Yeah, the thing about Star Trek is that it's a lot more in your face on a regular basis. I mean, Star Wars, until recently anyway, they were coming out with a movie every 3 or 4 years, and you'd go and watch your movie, and it'd be great, and that'd be it until the next one came out. Whereas Star Trek, you had series after series after series, and that's not to mention the reruns. And the DVDs and stuff like that. So, you know, you just had Star Trek in front of you a lot more.
Understandable. What other? Because you've pulled other. Sorry, I just came up with another question. You've pulled. There's a lot of sci-fi. We take it it very much. You know, you do like your pop culture. We get references, Star Wars, Star Trek. But we get other references to other pop culture stuff, and of course that's one of the things that keeps coming up about the Bobs is our humor's all the same, and we just keep rerunning the same jokes. Which, by the way, I totally love that. But every time something happens, they start humming the Bicycle Built for Two, and just I love that type of in joke. It's very much of the people I hang out with. Like we have our own in jokes, and so I appreciated that a lot.
Yeah. Well, Piers Anthony and the Terry Pratchett are probably the best at that, in terms of in jokes and stuff that you have to pick up on. Somebody else did one. I think it's Larry Niven who did one where he actually took shots at other authors, and I can't remember the title of it, but one of the main protagonists was a character that everybody kept calling Purple, and he couldn't figure out why they kept calling him Purple. These are aliens anyway. And they said, well, when we first asked you your name, the translator gave your name as a mauve, a shade of purple gray. So his name was Asimov.
Okay.
And I'm sure as soon as we hang up, I'll remember the name of the book. But those types of in jokes are great because they're like little Easter egg puzzles inside the book that just give you that little extra jolt of endorphins or whatever it is while you're reading. And a little bit of extra satisfaction on top of the character getting away with whatever he gets away with, or not getting his head cut off or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I know vinegarized fries shows up a lot in your books, so
I really like the smell of vinegar on fries.
Who doesn't?
I don't have a great sense of smell. It's actually, unfortunately, one of my weakest senses, but vinegar and fries comes through really clear.
It's a good smell.
Yes, that's fantastic.
I just noticed it kind of really stuck out, in the books that I read. I'm just like, well, he's stuck on that. Not that I'm blaming you at all.
No. And now I'm hungry.
Yeah, there you go. Well, sorry about that. All right, for I guess the 15th time, does anyone have any other questions? All right, cool. I guess we should go ahead and wrap up. Let's go ahead and just run around real quick. Have you been reading anything else? I'm just going to throw out there. I've actually read our next possible 2 books. The next book for next month is, this is going to sound weird coming from a podcast that claims to be really geeky, How to Make Anyone Fall in Love with You. It's an interesting read. It was written in 1997, so you can imagine how some of the ideologies for this come about. So it's going to be an interesting read. And
because it's February.
It's
we like
because
to do relationship books.
We generally do a relationship type book whenever it's February, just to, and then kind of, tear it apart from more of a, I don't want to say scientific, but more of a geeky type view. And then I read the first book in the Aftermath, the Star Wars Aftermath series. I think it's going to work out for the book club. It's very much, if you've read, or I say read, everything I do is through Audible. I do all my reading through Audible. And it's very much like all the other Star Wars books. So it's got all the music and the sound effects, and it's got a really good narrator. And so I think it's going to be fine for that. Otherwise, I haven't really been reading anything else. What about you, Jen?
Nope. I just tore through these last 2 books in literally 4 days because I have been so overwhelmed. So I listened to them on like 1.5 speed. But it's actually good because I remember more of it having just read it. Just trying to read the next book, and that's all I have time for right now. So,
Sean, reading anything else?
I'm still reading The Others by Robinson. So it took quite a turn. It's really good science fiction, first person. It's a very good pace. Every now and then you get a little surprise, and oh crap, this is cool. So yeah, it's I'm about 2/3 of the way through it.
Ray and Chris, y'all read anything right now?
I've been re-listening to the Bobiverse books. That's about it right now. I've actually put Singularity Trap on my next book that I want to read. And then you've been Skin Map, eh?
I finished The Skin Map by Stephen Lawhead. It's the first of a trilogy that I can't remember right now, but it ended, as these things do, right at the good part. So now I have to go and but I'm lucky that the whole series is out. And then I'm reading The Cursed Child, which is a Harry Potter book. It's the screenplay, and I love it so much.
Okay, I'll add that to my list.
Yes,
yeah, it's good.
It's super good. And yeah, I think I might make the kids read it too.
Logan has.
Yeah, it's really good.
Dennis, have you been reading anything?
I just started on listening to The Expanse, starting
okay.
with Leviathan Wakes on Audible. I've watched the entire series on Amazon Prime, and it was really good. But of course, I had no idea how that relates to the book. Sometimes, they just go off
Yeah.
direction. So now I'm going to find out how true they were.
Yeah,
That's what it is.
Listened to the whole series. I haven't watched the series on Amazon Prime, but I really enjoyed the book series.
Well, the Amazon Prime series is really good. Very well done. Very consistent. Good special effects. Good physics.
Oh, okay. Now you got.
Those are important. There's nothing worse than having bad physics in a story.
Banking spaceships and whooshes and stuff like that. No, the ships in The Expanse, they actually accelerate and decelerate, and they have free fall, and they shoot at each other with rail guns and stuff, and it's cool space battles.
Nice. Very cool. Real quick, this just popped in my head. As an author, how do you come down on the whole read the book first before you watch the movie, or watch the movie before you read the book?
I can't give you a consistent rule because I've seen all variations on that. 2001: A Space Odyssey, I thought the book was far better than the movie, although the movie had great special effects, especially for the day. The Relic, the movie was much better than the book.
Oh, really? I loved the movie. I never read the book.
I read it first.
I have to be careful here because it's always you're always on shaky ground when you start critiquing other authors and stuff. But there's a character in the book that isn't in the movie, and I don't think the movie suffers for it. I think the pacing in the movie is much better. It probably helps that I saw the movie first too, but who knows?
I have to agree with you on that. I can cite references for both sides where there's been movies that I've gone to see and I'm like, oh my God, I would never, this was a horrible movie. I would never read the book. But since I had read the book first, I was like, wow, they just completely changed it. This was a great, great book. And they just did something completely wrong with the movie. So
Abraham.
What?
Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is a fantastic book. And they changed so much in that movie.
There's a lot. I have a lot of feels about.
Sorry, I didn't mean to continue on this.
Well, the opposite is true for The Princess Bride, and I read the book and was like, "What did you do?"
Really?
I love the movie. It's like cult classic, but the book I was just mortified with it.
And see, I think Jurassic Park is a better movie than the book was.
I agree with that.
Steven Spielberg just did. I mean, there's so many problems with the movie as to spatial locations with the T-Rex and everything else, but it doesn't matter. You just watch it and you're like, there's dinosaurs and it looks awesome. So.
And they're eating people.
Yeah. And exactly. Yeah. And it looks real. So.
It does.
That one still holds up today.
Yes, it does hold up. Yes. So.
The thing about The Princess Bride, though, is a lot of what made the movie so good was the actors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They really cast that well.
They did.
Yeah.
Anyone want a peanut?
No more rhyming. I mean it.
Yeah, sorry. We're just gonna start quoting the whole movie, so we gotta move on. All right. Well, if you would please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Music. You can always find us at epicallygeeky.com, where you can find all of the other shows as well. We're actually moving to kind of a more structured recording and release. We're going to try to get on having a new show every week. The different shows. So we'll have Marginally Geeky will be out one week. We'll have the Epically Geeky show the next. Sustainably Geeky will be in there, and then Procrastinators. And we are starting our 5th show. It will probably be at the end of next month or sometime mid-month. Creatively Geeky, where we're going to sit around and talk about and hype each other up on our creative endeavors, whether it be writing or 3D printing or whatever it might be. So we'll have some more information about that.
Remember when Eugene said he wanted to slow down and not do as much? a couple
At
years
least
ago.
I cut the one show back to make room for the other. I didn't just like shoehorn another one in. So I'm bad about that. And as always, you can find us at Epically Geeky on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Where can we find you online, Mr. Taylor?
My blog page is dennisytaylor.org. I'm on Twitter and fairly active, and I'm on Facebook and not so active. And I make appearances in the Facebook group Fans of the Bobiverse occasionally.
Okay.
Oh. Cool.
Yes, I'll have to join that one. So.
Yes, yes.
I also have an Instagram account, but mostly I just post pictures from Whistler.
That's okay.
There's nothing wrong with that.
There's
They're Texans. They don't see snow.
no, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, Sean, where can we find you online?
You can find me on most of the geeky podcasts, except for Sustainably Geeky. I tried making my own soap one time, burned a hole in my tub. So, screw you guys.
Too much water.
Also, Facebook. You can find me. I'm the guy with this face here. Yeah, that's about it. I just come around.
Good deal. Ray, where can we find you online?
The Reluctant Yeti. You can find me on Instagram or Twitter sometimes. And I've got some paintings coming, which is gonna be fun. So
Yes,
it's
I
finally got my 4 by 4 foot by 4 foot canvases done. So
Chris, where can we find you online?
Here at Marginally Geeky, on Epically Geeky, Sustainably Geeky, and Creatively Geeky, which I'm very, 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 very excited to get that one started, because I feel like it's the kick in the ass that I need to get my shit done. And on Instagram, so Instagram finally decided that I wasn't a bot and reactivated my account.
Yay!
Well, I'm back. It's the Burrow Life, Burrow as in Burrow of Harry Potter. So, and it's the.burrow.life, and that's on Instagram. And yeah.
Good deal. Jen, where can we find you?
Real quick, I just joined the group, and there are qualifying questions you have to answer to be in this group. So they're really serious.
ooh,
Nice.
Fans of the Bobiverse.
Okay.
So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Het's Gonna Be Me, and never gets old. And we will have a new episode of Sustainably Geeky dropping next week once I get that to Eugene, and then of course here on Marginally Geeky, Epically Geeky. Did I already say this?
What? No.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
all.
I feel like I'm repeating myself.
We do.
And
It's
then
just over and over
The
again.
new show, Creatively
Creatively
Geeky. Yeah. So.
And as always, you can follow my individual wacky adventure at Optimus Gene on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. For everyone on the site, have a good night.